Where was the Switch
Pro.
Pro at E3? It was oddly MIA. Do you want to give some context into that, Eric, or do you want me to?
Why don't you give it a kick it off?
Okay. Well, the Switch Pro was missing from E3. I think it's more than expected. I think there's a lot of credible rumors about it being in production or close to being in production. So why didn't Nintendo show anything? Why was it missing? And what is the wider strategy behind kind of keeping it under wraps a bit longer? So let's sort of dive into that, Eric. What do we know so far about the Switch Pro and the rumors around it?
Well, hardware wise, it's tough to say because I think most of the people generally look at what NVIDIA's kind of roadmap is for chips to say this is likely what's going to be in there. So looking at the latest Tegra line chip, sale price wise, there actually does appear to be something that's possibly realistic because a few retail companies have come out with prices that are listed under Switch Pro, which or some moniker there, like that. But that stuff is can sometimes be also just placeholder, right? It gives the clerks at companies the ability to take reservations and that kind of thing for an anticipated console, one that you're pretty confident is going to be released. So even that is somewhat of a rumor. And I think that's basically it. The other rumor about the graphics is that DLSS will factor in pretty heavily on the graphics chip. It'll be capable of some of that upscaling stuff, which would be very welcome for the Switch, given that it is definitely showing some age these days, where most games that run on a 1080p, even a 1080p screen, are noticeably down-resed in order to hit frame rate with all the content and all the game content going on at the same time. Yes, any kind of assistance that you can get from AI for graphical fidelity, all the better.
Yeah.
There's other stuff that I've missed.
Well, I mean, there are known quantities here, which is basically that the OLED provider,
Yeah.
Panasonic, I think, is definitely, or no, it's LG, I believe, but it's definitely producing panels for the Switch. They've said so in press releases. So it's no longer a secret that Nintendo has procured OLED panels, inexpensive ones, but inexpensive OLED panels for a version of the Switch that's coming out in the future. Additionally, there has been information about NVIDIA, and particularly the sunsetting of the Tegra chip that is used in the Switch, which would put Nintendo at a really odd place where they either will specifically pay NVIDIA to continue to produce and procure chips, or they do the smart thing, which is get new hardware that's backwards compatibility, but is backwards compatible with the Switch, but allows them to make use of a new generation of hardware. Plus, there probably wouldn't be any problems with it. In fact, they could probably manufacture a brand new chip that's at a smaller fabrication size for the same amount of money that they're probably getting the Tegra chip that they currently use in the Switch for. So one way or another, either they're procuring the old chips in lots and allotments so that they can continue to produce, but that means the Switch standard, the one that we currently have, only has a couple of years left on it, one way or another, or that Nintendo is in fact going to be, even if they don't call it a brand new whatever, they are likely going to be sticking a brand new Tegra chip inside of a Switch. And why wouldn't they run forward with a bunch of fanfare about better battery life and whatnot with a brand new Tegra chip?
Yep.
So those are the known things. So I think with that information, it's hard to believe that Nintendo does not have a new piece of hardware right on the horizon. And for them to be ahead of chip shortages and whatnot, not just the current chip shortages, but the shortage in the Tegra chip itself, they'd likely be ramping up and getting ready to manufacture stuff within the next half of the year.
You
So,
would
go ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to say that we would expect that it would be a internal chip and everything would be NVIDIA built for backwards compatibility with the current Switch.
Yeah, I'd have no doubt that it's still NVIDIA supplied, especially if 4K is a target, then DLSS, which is part of the NVIDIA architecture, would gladly go in there. Not only that, but the Tegra has also enabled things like game streaming on the Switch for games like, what was the game that was just announced that was going to be on Switch, but with game streaming? So what are the E3? Guardians of the Galaxy.
Guardians, yep.
Yeah, and there's been a handful of games that have used streaming, and part of that is enabled because the Tegra architecture was built with that in mind. So presumably, they'll be doing the same thing with the Tegra next. And so game streaming and DLSS may be a core feature set that would keep them stuck to NVIDIA plus backwards compatibility.
Yeah. There's...
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's. I'm looking at the Tegra Wikipedia page right now, and they have one scheduled called, the code name is Atlan, ATLAN, and it looks like it would be. They announced it April 12th of this year at a GPU technology conference, and there's very few details so far.
Yeah, they just had coy mentions of like next gen portable gaming hardware.
Yep.
But it's also like, I think it was in Tesla's, the original Teslas. They've used Tegra chips in a lot of interesting places, including the Shield streaming system thing.
Yep.
All right. So the real question is if they're likely producing the Switch Pro or whatever it's going to be called, next version of Switch, why is Nintendo keeping tight-lipped about it? Do you have any theories as to why that might be the case? What kind of strategy they'd be employing here?
Yeah, I think, business-wise, looking at it, it's very likely that there's no reason to do it yet. They probably have enough backstock, and it's continuing to sell well. And I would assume that what they're doing right now is reaching out to specific game developers to give them an SDK and a development kit that, hardware, if possible, to allow them to start taking advantage of it. And so that there will be hardware available, games available that can take advantage of it. I mean, it could be as simple as it's at the very least, they'll release this new hardware and it will be a spec bump, bare minimum, and all games that run right now will suddenly be able to play at 4K. The same kind of what we saw with the PlayStation 5 playing PS4 games when certain things were unlocked or whatever. There might be a piece to that that's similar with the Switch Pro. My suspicion here is that they're kind of like, well, we can hold off and get some games built that really showcase what the new hardware is capable of, and get that, make them or give them a better chance of coming out day and date together, as well as allow their current, inventory of Switches to actually sell, because it's still a hot commodity.
Cool. There may be another point there too, which is because of the groundswell of purchases within the past year and a half due to COVID, they may not want to create a lot of fanfare around a Switch, like a mid-grade Switch update that would make people's recent purchases feel inadequate. So at an E3, it may not be an opportune time where like there's a bunch of new Switch owners going like, tell me about what are the games I can look forward to. And they're going, by the way, the hardware you just bought is being replaced. Congratulations. You can't get all these cool features. It would be a bad strategic move on their behalf. And so it may actually fall into like, had it not been for COVID, that they would have been planning the release of it this year, but because COVID happened and there was a groundswell of brand new buyers when they expected a lull, they suddenly had to rethink their deployment plans of a Switch, especially at E3, announcing that information and making people feel like they were, they purchased something that doesn't have as much value anymore. Especially if they match price point, which I could see them doing, and or at least match price point very soon after if they are getting rid of Switch inventory and bringing in the Switch Pro as its replacement. It's really unclear exactly why, but that may be a strong consideration of theirs. So, yeah, I mean, I guess there's probably a very good reason, and I could assume, like, what do you think might be changing for Nintendo? Like, do you think we'll see a Switch Pro this year? It would be a good idea for them to release a Switch Pro this year. What are your sort of feelings on that?
I think it would be, again, just the dated quality of graphics on things, on games that we're seeing these days. I think developers are probably hungry for that, because the Switch is, we just got a whole slew of, the Switch was already behind in the last generation, and now with the new PlayStation and Xbox consoles, it's even more behind. And it would be nice of them, for all the developers, the third-party developers that they work with, to kind of catch up a little bit, even if it's not all the way. It's going to very likely be another handheld, so it's not going to be as powerful as the major consoles. But if they can kind of get back up, it helps developers, right? It helps those of us creating games not have to go through quite so many hoops when we're creating a 3D model for a game, and then have to have like the really high res, very nice versions, and the itsy little like chopped to heck version for the Switch. Because there's so many people on the Switch, you want to target the Switch because it sells well, and there's a big population for your games, of players there to buy your games. So, there is the aspect of helping developers out and keeping the amount of development space that they have to consider, smaller. And then there is the whole concept of it's just the game players who bought the Switch when it first came out have been playing the same console for quite a long time, and it's a natural life cycle for people to say, hey, I'd like something a little bit more. And that natural life cycle also includes, the chip manufacturing, as we said before. If NVIDIA says, oh, we're not making any more of this, we're done, it's not a profit center for us anymore, or shut it down. Either Nintendo comes up with bundles of cash and says, no, keep doing it, please. We'll pay you extra money for it. Or, they put that money towards buying, the new hardware. So it's like Nintendo can cut out money from their profits and support an old hardware that is going to have fewer and fewer players as people as even cell phones overtake what the console's capable of doing. Or they put that same money into developing a new kind of piece of hardware that will also have its standard life cycle, and they'll get more money rather than diminishing returns, they'll have increasing returns over the life cycle of that hardware revision. It seems like it's the right time to start thinking about, especially with NVIDIA saying, now we're done on that chip. It's the right time to do that hardware switch. I don't know. Do you have other thoughts there?
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me with the way Nintendo has behaved in the past, and given their E3 presentation, that like they have a really strong slate of games scheduled throughout the end of the year. So like I think it's like starting the fall, they have an exclusive game launched every month. I mean, it doesn't mean everybody's going to buy every single one of those, but you have your Mario parties, you have Metroid, you have, I mean, there's like a bunch of really quality content, including Skyward Sword, remake, whatever they're calling that. So there's a lot of good stuff coming out. I don't think they need to launch the console this year. I don't think they need to drive profit with a brand new console. I think what they can do, and it's not strange for Nintendo to do, is to punt and launch in like March.
Right.
Which they have done before. They have done like early year releases, and it allows them to prepare for the next winter Christmas release and really market and push it. So like they get their like slow console sales thing going on in the first couple months, and then they can really supercharge it for the winter, where they can like really bring in strong profits and strong sales numbers to sort of support the life of that next generation of console. So I really wouldn't be surprised if this gets punted until
2022.
Yeah, next year, spring timeframe.
Yeah, I can see that as well. It's it would allow for one final hurrah in terms of like holiday season.
Especially with all those new console owners, like there's a ton of them. So